Okay, this is going to be a series of videos, so the one you're watching is only one of a series, and I do encourage you to watch the rest of them. Also, I encourage you to watch the full-length webumentary titled Global Warming, Myth or Reality, A Skeptic's View. It goes through the entire science behind global warming, but with this series, we're going to pick and choose some interesting pieces, and we're going to ask the viewer, does global warming pass the stink test? We're going to take a look at the science, and I want you to ask yourself, does that even make sense? Most importantly, ask yourself, if a big oil company produced a report like that, wouldn't the environmentalists be going ape nuts? Because what we're going to do is we're going to take a hard look at the science, and then once again, just ask yourself, does this pass the stink test? Okay, another practice that's totally violated by the global warming scientists is the use of proxies versus direct measurements. Almost always, if you have a direct measurement, you go with that. Now, here's the hockey stick chart. The first violation that you'll see is that the thermometer, which is a direct measurement, was invented back in 1714, and yet they only use temperature data from a thermometer between 1902 and 1998. For the time prior to that, they used tree rings, coral, ice cores, and historical records. Now you got to ask yourself, why would you be using proxies when you have direct measurements through thermometers going back, maybe as early as 1714? And we're going to examine the longest record that we have in a little bit here. So the principle here is that if you have a way to directly measure something over a proxy or an estimate, you do that. The best example I can give is weight. Let's say you're going to do a study on weight. Now you can guess someone's weight by having their height, their sex, and their waist. And I can guess someone's weight. Matter of fact, if you go to any circus or a fair, they'll do that. Those are people on the sideshows do that all the time. But why would you ever do that if you have a scale? You just simply have them get on the scale. So the question is, why, when the global warming theorists had temperature data, why did they choose to go with a proxy over direct measurements? Well, the only reason you would ever really do that is because the direct measurement, the more accurate measurement, doesn't support your conclusion, so you have to tweak the data. One other interesting thing about this temperature graph is that even the global warming scientists haven't even agreed on what it is. Then they have a consensus and they can't even agree on the temperature charts. Most ironically, if you ever watch Al Gore's movie real closely, he uses in his own movie two different temperature charts. As you can see, the one on the right has the little ice age and the medieval warming period. The one on the left is the hockey stick chart. So Al Gore is either schizophrenic or he doesn't even understand what's going on in his own movie. Now let's take a look at the longest direct measurement, temperature measurement of temperature in the northern hemisphere. It comes from Albany, New York. If you take a look there, you'll see back in 1822 the average temperature was 49.2. In 2005 the average temperature is 49.2. There has shown, and the way you really do this is you run a regression on the data. When you do it, what do you find? You find that actually, on average, the temperatures over the last 150 plus years, using the longest direct measurement of temperature in the northern hemisphere, you actually find that temperatures fall. The only way you're showing that global warming is going on is when you use these bizarre proxies like using tree rings and coral instead of a thermometer. That is bad science no matter how you look at it. More importantly, let's take a look at the most accurate readings out there. Let's take a look at the rocket scientists. Let's take a look at NASA. What do they say? They use satellite measurements, multiple measurements. They use it all over the globe. What do they show? They show that there is no discernible warming trend in the Earth's lower atmosphere over the last 18 plus years. So those are the most accurate temperature readings showing no warming. Okay, let's take a look here. What do they do with carbon dioxide? Once again, remember proxy versus direct. Direct measurement would be a CO2 air grab sample. A proxy would be core samples. Well, if you take a look here, sure enough, what do? The left half is ice core data. That's a proxy. It's taken from Antarctica. The right half is from Mauna Loa, a CO2 spewing volcano, which is a direct measurement, an air grab sample where they go out in the patio and they actually grab air. So they're combining a proxy and a direct measurement. Now, why would they do that if they had direct measurements? Well, sure enough, they do have direct measurements of CO2, atmospheric CO2, going back to the early 1800s. Well, the reason they don't show you this is because it is totally contradictory to the ice core data. The direct measurements, which would be consistent with the right half of the chart they use, shows that the CO2 has actually been falling since the early 1800s. This is air grab samples from Peru, North America, and Europe, going back that far. And you can see it peaked back around the early 1800s of around 550 parts per million. It's now around 370 parts per million. So if you use air grab sample, which is a direct measurement, versus the proxy that they use with ice core samples, you'll see that that CO2 has actually been falling since the early 1800s. More importantly, this sample is taken from multiple locations all around the globe, whereas the ice core data comes from one spot, Mauna Loa comes from one spot, and they don't even overlap them. So once again, more bad data, inconsistent data. They choose to use proxies over direct measurements, which is inconsistent with good science practice.